Francie.
Hi, Skippy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Diane, who else do we...
You have it, Skippy. Everybody else, we've got Rachel out, John Ward out, and Rick Head out. So we should be all set.
Okay. Then whenever you're ready, we can read the roll.
Okay. David?
Here.
Francie?
Here.
Kelly?
Here.
Skippy?
Present.
Carson?
This meeting is being
Here.
recorded.
So out is John Ward, Rick Head, and Rachel Richards. Thank you.
And I did talk to
And I
her.
also just want to chime in that I have to jump off before 5:45 to facilitate the community meeting that Public Health is hosting tonight. And Francie's here, so we're first.
Yeah, actually flying solo, first time picking up the training wheels.
We'll give it a shot.
So we'll start with public comment. Do we have anybody on the line who would like to talk about anything that is not on our agenda? Excuse me, while I find a pen. I did not get a list ahead of time, so I'll just invite you to speak up if you have anything that you would like to add. One more chance for public comment. All right, seeing none, we will close that section of the meeting and move along to our executive director and or staff comments. Diane?
It's a really short one tonight, so no slides. You met the recruiter last week, Katie Rush and Tim Gagan. The application process closed last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, 19th of February, and we've got 28 applicants. They're starting the process of screening folks for us, and I've met with Sarah Ott, and I've got a meeting set up next week with John Peacock to review the recommended process for that. So more to come, but that's really the only update tonight.
Any questions for Dan? Let's see.
Oh, sorry, I should add, the move to Truscott is going well, and thanks to Cindy and Bethany, because they have taken on the awful job of picking colors and the other things that we need to pick. So, but it's going along well, and we do expect to be out of the West Hyman office, East Hyman office, sorry, on by the end of May. And I will tell you, not a day goes by where every day there's conversation where someone says, and it's going to be so great when we're all in the same office. So we're all looking forward to that. And if the vaccination schedule is on track, we may actually all be able to be in there at the same time. It's going to be exciting. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Dan, I do have one question for you, not seeing any others, which is just, I know you've mentioned before that the board will have interaction with candidates at some point, and I'm wondering, do we know when that point is and or how applicants that will be? Is that a set number, or is that going to be by feel?
It's not exactly a set number. We anticipate the process will be that, and again, I have to confirm this with John Peacock, but is that each of the candidates will be making a public presentation. That's actually required by Colorado state law. And what we found in the Wheeler process was we had them do multiple presentations that were the same, and it wasn't good. It by the time they were doing their second presentation, they were starting to, it was tiring, right? It's hard to prepare for that, and they're pretty much doing a 10-minute monologue and then a 20-minute Q&A with the facilitator, who will be the recruiter. That we still anticipate that to all be virtual. What we'd like to do is have the board will get, I don't exactly know what it'll look like yet, but it'll get a survey where you'll be able to provide confidential feedback to the recruiter, and that will also be provided to the city manager and the county manager, who are the hiring folks. So we won't do that for the public, but for the APCHA board, we will do that. And we anticipate that we're hoping there are going to be 4 finalists, that we bring 4 candidates forward in that process.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. Any last questions before we move on, guys? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar, which is the minutes of February 17th, and I would take a motion or a request for edits. Don't all jump at once.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Anybody want a second? Okay. Kelly's waving her hand. I see her.
Yeah, no, I'll second. I just wanted to confirm, because I didn't have it right up on my screen. The only thing on the consent agenda is the minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I will second the motion.
Right on. So, staff, would you read the roll?
David? David?
You're on mute.
Here.
Kelly?
Yep.
Yes.
There.
Skippy?
Yeah.
Carson?
Yes.
I think. 1, 2. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Beautiful. We're moving along, Kelly. I'm glad, because I want to have you here for the meat of this. So we'll move on to our first reading of Resolution 2. For the public, if you're watching, hasn't seen this yet, this includes a few different things, which is sort of grammatical and language cleanups to some elements of our regulations, the discussion of shifting Category 6 and 7 categories into Category 5, some issues around income calculation and in the ineligibility list. The board had previously had some questions and recommendations of staff, and so this is the first time they're bringing that stuff back. And so we're going to go through this. Guys, I have worked with staff to just sort of break this out into some chunks, just to make it kind of easier to go through and make sure that, Kelly, you have hopefully get to go through all of this. So I'll just call on Bethany to sort of present in little increments, and then we can dive into questions, changes, or requests on second reading, if that sounds good to everybody. And so that first chunk, Bethany, is the grammatical and language cleanup. I know this is something that the board had indicated that they were, okay with moving forward at a previous meeting, but can you give us the rundown on that?
Sure. These were approved at the January 6, 2021 meeting this year as grammatical cleanup. So it's nothing is policy change. It's adding different words. So we might have added a the or an a, or rewritten a sentence so that it was clearer. But there is no policy change in that. And it's pretty small items such as that. There's about 10 of them throughout the document. So, but nothing's policy change, very clear about that. And it's just grammatical language cleanup.
So I guess the first question is this okay to move forward as is, or does anyone have any notes, follow-ups, or other questions? Seeing any. So then part B here, Bethany, if you could, is Category 6 and 7 into 5. We discussed this at the last meeting, but if you could give us a brief recap and walk us through this, and then the question will be comfortable moving this section forward.
Sure. And again, the Category 6 and 7 going to 5, that was approved a while ago from the APCHA board. Essentially what these regulation change is incorporating Category 6 and 7 maximum sales price into Category 5 and establishing the Category 5 rental rates and establishing rental rates for 4-bedroom units. And as we discussed at the last meeting, and I will just reiterate, this does not have any negative effects for any of our current homeowners whatsoever. So it is merely establishing something that should have been done originally when the board moved to combine those categories.
So any questions here? Kelly, I do see you.
Okay. I guess more just a restating of what I'm hearing a little bit. So with the merging of these categories, it does not affect the maximum sales price for someone who at the time when they purchased may have purchased as a category 6 or 7. They would now in a sale be regarded as a category 5, but their maximum sales price is the same.
Correct.
Oh, okay. So, you know, heard about this from Woody Creek Mobile Home Park as an issue, because that's an example of where this would play out, as opposed to newer units. Say, I think in Burlingame where I live, I don't think this would apply because the maximum categories there would be 5. Correct?
Correct. And again, this is not going to harm, especially Woody Creek. And Cindy, you can jump in too, because I know you were working a lot on this, if you would like.
Yes, for one thing, there are category 6 and 7 units at Burlingame, but again, this does not affect them. What it does is it actually kind of opens up more applicants for these properties. It doesn't affect their purchase, their maximum price. Actually, for Woody Creek, it's more of a positive thing, because some people are trying to replace their older mobile homes that are on the property. This allows them a greater maximum price by going up as high as category 7 versus what was category 6. So category 5 incorporated category 6 and 7. So it's actually a benefit to the category 5 units the category 6 units at Woody Creek.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarity.
Any other questions here, or are we okay with moving this bit forward? And Francie, just so you know, I can see Kelly. I can't see you on my screen. I got visible. So if you want me to hear you, please raise your digital hand. Okay, so seeing nothing there. The third element here is income calculation. The board had a couple things they wanted checked in on here. So just taking these one at a time, and then we'll circle back if we missed anything on the first go. Bethany, in income calculation, the first thing was making sure that there's alignment between the rental and ownership qualifications, with the exception of LIHTC rentals, because it's out of our control and a different thing. So can you speak to that alignment concern that was raised by the board at the last meeting?
Sure. Rental and ownership income calculation is 100% aligned, so I apologize if there was any confusion about that last time. Skippy, you're correct. The only part that is different is the low income tax credit housing, and that is Truscott Phase 2 and Aspen Country Inn, and the Colorado Housing Finance Authority dictates what we look at from an income standpoint for those properties. But our rental and ownership income calculation is completely the same for both rental and ownership.
Any questions or follow-up here from anybody? This is going so well. So the second thing, so moving that forward, we talked about, not in here, but moving forward, John and Carson doing some review of those qualification structures for improvements. And I know I saw an email fly around about a proposed structure for how to do that, and I just wanted to have you share that with the board, Bethany, and then see if we're all aligned on that. And then, you know, kind of the follow-up is, well, what do we do with that after it's done?
Sure. So the idea is that Carson and John will sit down with certainly Cindy and myself, as well as Julie Kiefer, our qualification specialist, and talk through the current process. We'll prepare to provide them with a document from HUD, which is how we have arrived at our income calculation, so that they are familiar with that. And then we'll take a look at some of our self-employed tax returns and that we've received in the past. And before anyone outside of our office looks at any of those, we'll make sure that all of the personal information has been removed enough so that we can start to look at what people are writing off and what might want to be added back in or not be added back in when we arrive at a self-employed individual's income calculation. And so that will be done, as Skippy said, kind of not in a board meeting, but certainly all of that information will be brought back to a board meeting if we were to decide to modify and change the income calculation down the road. But the idea is to keep the income calculation how it is, how we've been operating, and then to have a really good discussion about why we've arrived there and what maybe we should change moving forward.
Yeah, great. Kelly?
Sorry for the delay. I'm like have my PDF up and I'm toggling back and forth here. Yeah, no, I would note that I think that conversation is really important to have. I'm wondering, have we in recent years had any self-employed individuals request a special review for unusual circumstances related to their income calculation?
We have not, as far as I know, and Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, certainly not since I started in 2018 have I seen that. There's certainly a discussion with them about what we add in, and if we have any questions as to, what was taken on their tax returns or have any questions about their business, we have that conversation with them, but there's been no special review or anything like that.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. No, I appreciate that. I think that helps show that this is sort of part of our ordinary application and review process. I would just note in the language under that bullet, I just would strike that first bit of language about it not being easy to calculate. I don't want people to feel somehow different, or that they have some complications to accessing the system by virtue of their chosen employment. So I think I brought that up last time, but I would like to see that removed before second reading.
I apologize, Kelly. We can certainly remove that. I know you brought that up, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that strike. Carson?
Agreed.
Yeah, cool. And David and Francie agree as well?
Yes.
Great. Question for you, Carson. After you guys review this, how do you envision bringing back your recommendations, and how do you recommend the board engage with those recommendations as it sort of fits into all of our other goals? In my mind, the goal for all of this is to try and be as fair as possible, and because we don't want to have a situation where we are putting somebody into a higher category than they should be, but we also don't want to have a lot of the times with self-income, and that's why we've got the add backs, is you could have somebody that after all of their sort of write-offs and everything, they could be into a very, very, very low category, sort of artificially compared to what somebody who's not self-employed may be. And so in my mind, it's really just trying to I think the good way to approach it is to try and look at it from a lending perspective of how much money how would a bank look at it, and if that way you've got somebody hold on, buddy, if you've got somebody that's if they're trying to get a loan, that's just sort of naturally going to put them into the right category. So in my mind, it's a conversation, and then I think sort of come up with a plan, like Bethany said, with staff and with John, and then I think the easiest way to do that would just be for us to come back to the board and sort of walk through our thought process on that, and then we can go through the feedback and we can make adjustments based upon feedback from the board. But that's sort of my thought process around it. Okay, so I'm hearing you would come back with both the sort of philosophical outline of how you got there, but also a proposed plan for review.
Right.
Cool. Any other thoughts on that from the rest of you guys?
Yeah, Skippy, I have a question. It's Francie.
Yeah.
Being new to this, I'm finding myself a little unclear
isn't this what's sort of at the heart of Sonia and Lee's problems with the actions? I thought it was related to their inability to show sufficient income, and so this seems like an effort to clear that up, and it seems like the more clear it is, the better. Is that not right?
I don't know if, can we discuss, I don't want to discuss specific cases.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have just said previously.
Yeah, so what I will say is, my opinion, none of the changes we will be looking at making, how do I say this? I don't believe any of the changes that we're talking about making would have impacted any of the recent high-profile compliance cases.
Okay.
And just to piggyback on this, the income calculation is how we determine what category someone is when they're trying to enter the system. So either from an ownership or a sales perspective, we don't look at this once they're in the system, unless it's a rental requalification every 2 years. But from an ownership standpoint, this is how we initially place you into a category so that you can determine what you can qualify to purchase.
Okay, so let me just ask one more question and then we can move on. So let's say you enter the system because you qualify at a certain income level, but then your income quadruples. You get to stay in the system?
So if you've already purchased, and let's say you win the lottery and end up with $10 million the next day, and you're in a Category 2 unit, you can remain in that Category 2 ownership unit. If you're still bidding, though, we do requalify folks that are bidding, so ones that are trying to purchase every 12 months. And then our renters requalify every 2 years.
Oh, okay, great.
And if they do then all of a sudden make more money, a renter might not be qualified for that Category 3 unit anymore. And we allow them some time to either find a new unit or to come back into qualification.
Okay, thanks a lot, Bethany. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
And Francie, also, I'll just say, because I remember being new very recently, and there are never too many questions to ask. Almost always, if you ask a question, 3 other people had it, and what's most important is just asking it. So don't ever feel like you're wasting time by asking it. You're always adding to the conversation, so don't feel rushed.
Thanks, Skippy. Okay.
100%.
Skippy, sorry, this is Diane. I wanted to add a reminder that we haven't really talked about since last week, which is simply that these are policies and processes which have always been written. There have just been internal documents that were used and guidelines that were policies that were followed internally. The reason that we're adding these to the regulations is at the recommendation of the hearing officer. Increased transparency is great. We wanted to do that, and where the board has really helped with this is, right, some of this is inside baseball, so helping it to put it into layman's terms or make clarifications where either it makes it sound overly complex or maybe just adding clarity. So that's really kind of the what of this process right now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like we're all in alignment on Carson and John looking at and bringing something back. So are there any other parts of the income calculation bubble here that we haven't talked about, additional questions or requests for information or second reading that anyone would like to voice? Seeing none, Bethany, we can move forward to the last part of this, which is the ineligibility list. The first thing that we had on the list was the fraud and misrepresentation language proposed by Rachel. Could you walk us through that change or changes?
Yes, I'm going to wait for Maddie to get us there. Thank you. And so one of the things Rachel had asked for was in number 1, deliberate fraud or misrepresentation. And Tom and I looked at the language and we settled on fraud or misrepresentation in transacting any business with APCHA. We did not want to add the word deliberate, but I do think this gets at what Rachel was looking for. I know she's not here tonight, so
I did talk to her and ask if she had any feedback, thoughts, or requests, and she said no, so I think she's okay.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else have anything on this point? David? Oh, you're going to put up that Smurf hand and then use it? Take that thing down. Okay. Second thing that we had from this conversation was looking into a solution to tie the ineligibility list to the fine and notice violation schedule that Kelly had initially brought up. Can you kind of walk us through thinking up in the immediate and longer term?
Sure. Maddie, can you just scroll down slightly on this page, please? Keep going. Okay, so number 11 was added in, which is stage 5 fine previously imposed. We felt like that was where it tied into the fine schedule. A stage 1 fine has the potential to become a stage 5 fine if folks don't respond. As just a reminder, if it is a stage 1 and APCHA were to issue a notice of violation, someone would have 15 days, and if they don't respond, it would become a stage 2 violation and would issue another notice of violation. So it is added in as a stage 5 fine. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or Kelly, if you're still concerned, answer those.
Questions on this?
No, I appreciate it. I think this makes sense. I also just want to take the moment to reiterate again that I really think our fine and fee schedule, for violations is an improvement upon the past, but it is not a full replacement of all of APCHA's enforcement available to it. So evictions can and probably will still happen, despite the adoption of this new schedule that is very tiered and gives people a lot more options to correct before reaching that point. It doesn't fully eliminate that point. And I just want to say that because I continue to sort of hear it and read it, and I want to make sure that folks in APCHA housing know and understand sort of all of this, but that is still an enforcement option available to APCHA should it reach that stage. So thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. And just to reiterate that, every notice of violation that we have sent out since the fine schedule went into place does give that as an option of a sale of the home. So we still are mentioning that in our compliance documentation. So,
Bethany, I have questions on this. This is just to clarify, but these are things that could land someone on the ineligibility list. They don't automatically do so, correct?
Correct. So again, the process is that, for example, a property manager might request someone to be added, and the executive director and myself will review that addition, make sure the documentation is there, and look at the events surrounding why that person is to be added, and then make the decision whether or not they should be added.
Okay. So one more question, but before I move on, Carson, just for you, I think, as you're leading us through the compliance discussion later, I know you've talked about cardinal sins. A lot of the cardinal sins lie in stage 5. And so I just want us to be mindful of the potential interplay between having this on the ineligibility list and any movement in compliance around any of those things. Yeah, Kelly, do you want to come in?
Well, it sounded like you were posing a question to Carson, so I
just saw your hand up.
Okay. Yeah, I also just, while we're talking about this, just want to note, I don't remember seeing this last week, so if this was just added, or 2 weeks ago, between then and now, I think it was a really good addition to add the hearing officer process for someone to request to be removed from this list. you know, again, that reinforces why it's helpful to adopt this in regulation. So it's very clear for the hearing officer to look to what the rule, you know, what all the language is to apply during that hearing. But I think that, yeah, I think that's a really good idea to give a person who, you know, maybe just have turned their life around in different ways, or, you know, has really taken effort to demonstrate why they should be able to access APCHA housing to be able to do so. So I think that's great. Thanks.
And Skippy, I don't want to jump in, but Kelly, that was a little bit of an attempt to clear up the language around the process that was already written, and then also to help with Rachel's request, which was to provide more curative solutions to homeowners or renters for non-monetary violations that landed them on the ineligibility list. So twofold. So thank you for that. I'm glad it's helpful.
Yeah, and I want to jump back to that in a second. But one more question for you on this, Bethany, is a stage 1 or 2 fine can become a stage 5 if there is no response in a certain period of time. Is that accurate?
So if we were to issue a notice of violation under a stage 1 fine, they have 15 days to respond to that. And I back up and say we issue in most cases a notice of investigation as well. We can also go straight to the notice of violation. If we go straight to the notice of violation, they have 15 days to respond to that. If there is no response, it becomes a stage 2 fine, and we'd issue another notice of violation. They'd have 15 days to respond. If they don't respond, it becomes a stage 3. We issue another notice of violation. They have 15 days to respond. If they don't, we issue a 4th notice of violation under a stage 4 fine, and they have 15 days. If they don't, then it becomes a stage 5 fine. So it's, my math is off, but it's close to 60 days, if I'm correct, adding quickly, before it would be actually come that stage 5.
But from a stage, what I'm just trying to get at is from a stage 2, which I think is a relatively low level offense, what's the total number of days before it could be 5 and on an eligibility list? Because, you know, people do travel in off season or whatever, and I would hate to accidentally be putting someone on the you get out forever list, or not forever, but until you reapply and go through it list for something minor because they were just out of town.
So Skippy, on my really quick calculation, it's about 75 days between a stage 2 and a when you'd end up on the ineligibility list. I'd also say that that's why we really ask for updated email addresses, because most of the time, not most of the time, as long as I have an email address, a notice of violation goes out email, regular mail, and certified mail. So hypothetically, it can come, you know, multiple ways. And then the one piece I will reiterate is in deed restrictions, it says that a notice of violation period is 15 days. And that goes back to the oldest deed restrictions I've seen. It still says that 15-day period. So.
Okay. So my request on second reading would just be to like double check that math and bring it back 75 days, and all of the means of communication seems reasonable to me, but I just want to make sure I understand that before the next reading. And I do see Kelly's hand up.
Well, and I mean, related to this though, a person would have to request a leave of absence if they were gone for more than 90 days, wouldn't they?
Correct, yes.
Or to live, you know, be present in your APCHA home for 9 months out of the year.
Yeah, I just wanted to
be
40 days or whatever that, yeah, I just wanted to understand the duration. Okay. Does everybody feel good on this point? Yes. Great. Bethany, you started to talk about this, but solutions to provide a list of curative solutions for homeowners with non-monetary violations. Can you walk us through that stuff?
Sure, Maddie, can you just slide down slightly? I think it's the next page, please. Thank you. So Part C, procedure for removal from ineligibility list. Monetary, it's the same. You have to pay your balance with APCHA. So if someone moves out owing us, for example, $2,000 in damages or late rent, they could write a check for $2,000. But the way to do it is to go through the hearing officer. So it's the same way that you would appeal from a notice of violation. So that's tied into the guideline or the regulations, excuse me, so that it is the same process, that it would end up with a hearing officer, and then the hearing officer would make the decision as to whether someone should be removed from the ineligibility list or not.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on this? I don't see any. If you guys would permit me just 1 minute, I just want to read through these last 2 points again, because I just want to make sure I don't have questions before the next meeting. Bethany, question. I think we were kind of, from my recollection, from the last meeting was this sort of tension between, you know, how prescriptive do we want to be so that we're providing actual tools to people, but then also having it open-ended enough so that we're not over-prescribing the tools that perhaps don't use anymore, or keeping people from bringing new tools in, giving that leverage to the hearing officer. So can you just talk a little bit about how you guys attempted to strike that balance and how you think it was reached?
So at the end of the day, it goes to the hearing officer. And so, you know, we listed out a couple different things, whether it's severity, any conduct of the individual since placement on the ineligibility list. So the hearing officer could ask for a landlord's, an interim landlord's recommendation. And so we've left it relatively open while providing, Maddie, can you scroll down a little bit more, please? Just below C right there. Thank you. So we have provided kind of a general list of not, you know, an anger management course or a letter of recommendation, that sort of list, but provided a idea of some things for the hearing officer to look at when making this decision, because each of those reasons on this list are for something different. And so being put on there for, you know, a violation of a deed restriction and being forced to sell the home is possibly different than being added on for multiple noise violations, multiple late payments that happened 10 years ago. And so I think there's flexibility for that hearing officer to look at these 5 things, A through E, to make that decision.
Any questions or thoughts here?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure, jump in, Francis.
Who is the hearing officer?
So the board has hired 2 hearing officers. One is Mick Ireland, and I will be completely honest, I'm blanking on the other individual's name at the moment, but he's also an attorney, not a local attorney. And Mick Ireland is the primary hearing officer. If he's unavailable or has a conflict of interest, we'll go to the other hearing officer for the backup. Okay, and then for D, is there a further delineation of what kinds of conduct will influence the hearing officer? So it's the conduct that got them on the list. And so the idea is, you know, if it's what got them on the list, and then the next step would be if they received a letter of recommendation or not from another landlord, what has the conduct been? So it's more looking at, you know, have they had a great 3 years of rental from a different landlord, and that landlord's willing to write a shining review, then, you know, they're likely to be able to come off. If they can't provide us with any shining letters of recommendation, might not be able to come off. But it's delineated then somewhere else which describes how you can get on the ineligibility list? So if you scroll back up, Maddie, please. The reasons that you can get on the ineligibility list are here. And so, for example, if it's a violation of a rental lease for one of APCHA's managed properties, and it had multiple issues with vandalism or damage to the unit or unapproved tenants. And so they've been put on there for multiple reasons from a rental standpoint of not treating the unit and well. And then if they do a positive landlord in between, then they could be removed from the list. Hypothetically, it is up to the hearing officer, so I'm speaking a little bit hypothetical because I can't tell you what he or she might do. But there is a reason someone was put on it, and then the hearing officer would have that information and the documentation from us, and then any sort of documentation from the individual that they would like to provide. And just based upon the cases that we have brought, Mick Ireland, for example, he asks for a ton of documentation and is really trying to get all the information he can possibly get before he makes any sort of decision.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I'm just looking at H, for instance, threatening behavior towards APCHA staff or neighbors, and I'm just hoping that doesn't provide a loophole for somebody that somebody else is interpreting their behavior as threatening, or, you know, so that's a hard thing to document, and I'm sure that is happening, that it's being documented when it occurs. I can think of some examples, for instance, but I think I'm just worried about G combined with the other one down below. Could be misinterpreted by an unfriendly public response to actions.
Of course, and so I can speak to those just quickly. When those come across usually from a staff member at Truscott that manages our rental units, and there's quite a lot of documentation, and the police is usually, and if not always, called by the second time, if not the first time that this happens. And so there is a conversation with both the Aspen Police Department and APCHA staff and that tenant to try to come to a resolution and to try to talk to the tenant about their behavior. Because as I mentioned last meeting, I think we've added two people in the past 12 months. So this is not a list it's not like we're putting a couple people on a week. It's very, they're very few and far between.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go back down to the section we were. So I think this is great. I appreciate the sort of broad strokes to provide the flexibility. I think what might also be helpful as a yes and to this would be like an F, where not everything is prescribed in the regulations because we don't need to be changing the regulations daily. But if going forwards, or at least from sort of mixed time, if the hearing officer could begin to catalog specific things that have worked in some form of, you know, regularly updated shared document that could be referenced by the individual, I think that would be really awesome. So it could be heading one, noise violations, and then it's like tool is, you know, using a decibel monitor for 1 month at their new property every night, right? Whatever it is, but just listing those things out as they've happened with the date of when they were used, not that they are the only things to be used, but these have worked before, just to give people some thought, I think would be a nice addition.
Can take that in.
Sorry, Skippy, just one concern about that, and I think I get your intent, right? Your intent is to provide people good ideas and a place to get that from. I think we can do that informally. Where we've got like 2 in the past year, that's a lot. It's a lot to maintain a list. The other thing is, if we provide a list of this is what's worked in the past, we will give people the idea that, well, that will work for you, and you know, no 2 of them are going to be exactly the same, and it's not like we have 5 of this type and 5 of that type. They're really super different from one another, and I think that's why bringing in that hearing officer matters. It's that independent third party. But I think keeping the list, it's going to be a little bit it will be burdensome, and also we will definitely give people the impression that there's a precedent. So if you do this, you'll get pulled off, and that's making a commitment on behalf of the hearing officer that we can't make as staff.
Yeah, I guess I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think providing a tool is not a guarantee of a result in the same way that, like, if I get a speeding ticket, it says on there that I could go to court and fight it. Doesn't mean that I get out of it just because everybody did. It just helps me understand what my options are to mediate the situation, you know?
Sure, and that's also a conversation that happens, right? And it's based upon, I mean, I think if you were to look over the past 3 years, the likelihood that there are even two people who landed on it for the same reason, there's a pretty low chance. I mean, when the staff in the summer walked me through like what the situations have been, they were all like, number one, it takes a lot to get there, and number two, it's going to be customized.
Yeah.
I need to jump off. I'm sorry to interject, but I'm passing the torch over to Francie, who I know will do the right thing. So, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that, Diane. And I think, you know, it's not as though we're going to go back retrospectively and dig up everything that's worked forever, which would be probably impossible, if not difficult. But, you know, over time, because we revisit these things every decade or so, I think we could just, like, you know, help people identify things. And people are in stressful situations, right? Like, nobody gets put on this list that doesn't have something going on that we're hopeful they'll be able to remedy at some point. And so it just sort of provides a helping hand, I suppose, when and if they're ready to re-engage.
Yeah, I think Skippy, I think Diane, I think I agree with Diane. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think if you start putting that stuff in writing, I think you just end up with exactly what Diane said. You're just sort of, I think you'd have just such a huge list that I think it's better just to keep those conversations informal.
Okay. So, David, Francie, anything else on this section here? Seeing none. So the last part about an ineligibility list is some solution to ban those who are on the ineligibility list from renting or occupying other non-APCHA managed or controlled units. Bethany, can you walk us through that?
Sure, Maddie, can you scroll up, please, to the first paragraph under the title, Ineligibility List? Right there. Okay, so we clarified the language up here so that an individual on the ineligibility list may not rent a unit when APCHA is the beneficiary of a deed restriction or otherwise responsible for management. So that that covers the idea that someone on the ineligibility list can't rent from one of our owners, like a random bedroom in their 3-bedroom. And so I think that tightened up the verbiage to clarify where you can and cannot rent if you're on this list.
And are there any remaining, like, areas that Civ is not fine enough to catch, or does that kind of cover everything, in your opinion?
I think that covers everything.
Anyone else, any other questions on this? Nada. Okay. So that's really everything, guys, that we had requested staff look at on the first go. Are there any other things within Resolution 2 in total that we didn't cover today that you need to see, request, or want to have changed prior to second reading? And Francie, I apologize if this is redundant because I'm sure you're doing the same thing over there, but you know, it's best that if we have any questions or whatever, we ask staff now so that when they come to second reading, we're able to approve.
And Skippy, to confirm, it is 75 days between a stage 2 if we were to issue a notice of investigation, and then stage 5, if they didn't respond, it would be 70, basically on the 76th day, we would add them.
That totally clears up that concern for me. If not hearing anything else, to go to second reading, do we have to take a formal action,
Yes.
or?
If you go to the memo, can you go up to the memo? There's, of the recommendation on the memo is the language that I basically need to move to public hearing. One more, it's before the resolution. Go down, recommendation. What's in bold, that's the motion that I need made.
Great. I would ask someone to make that motion and move this forward.
Make a motion to approve and move to public hearing set for March 17th, 2021, resolution number 02, series of 2021, adopting amendments of the Aspen Pitkin employee housing regulations.
Francie doing stuff all by herself. Anyone want to
So brave, so brave.
You're doing great.
I second the motion.
Love it. Can you guys read the roll?
Okay. David,
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Skippy,
Yes.
Francie,
Yes.
thank you.
Wonderful. All right, with that moving forward, we will move into the next section, as you'll all note, which is the kickoff to a compliance discussion. And Carson has been so kind as to volunteer to lead us through this. So, Carson, I'll hand it over to you, and thanks.
Hey, Skippy. So this is part of the 2021 work plan. One of the priorities on the work plan is to hold one or two preliminary discussions to determine if there are any compliance topics that the board would like to take up. So, we're not going to be having any public comment today. And the goal is not to solve any of these issues. It's really just sort of have the discussion of, are there any issues around compliance that we need as a board to take up? And I think that just given the fact that half of the board is missing today, I'm thinking maybe more than trying to discuss any specific points, maybe it's to come up with a list maybe of potential things that we want to look at as we move forward. Okay, so I put just sort of a list together of a couple of things to talk about, and just from a compliance standpoint. So one of those things that that I've got on my list is just as it relates to how we're going to look at work requirements going forward. So obviously we've got COVID. We've got a number of people who are not working and have not been able to work due to COVID. And so how are we going to look at those as we go forward? Hold on just a second. My son just answered a call. Hold on just.
We've got jokes.
Real life.
Sorry, Grandma and Grandpa called, and so my son was sitting here, and he picked up FaceTime and was just having a conversation. Can you go downstairs, buddy? Sorry about that. Okay, so all right. Okay, so I mean, how do you want to do this, Skippy? I mean, do we want to talk about these? I mean, from a compliance standpoint, and as far as providing direction to staff, I mean, is this something that we want to sort of say, yes, this is something we're going to take up? I mean, how did you sort of envision this?
I think last we talked about it, which was a little while ago because of all of our scheduling changes, you had a few items related to compliance that real strongly about, or had really thought about, I should say,
right.
That I had heard similar views from others on the board in sort of one-to-ones. So I think what would be great is if you just kind of share your perspective with us, and then we can look around at each step and say, hey, is there agreement on this thing? And then if so, we can talk about what to do with it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the COVID, how we're going to define work. I mean, I don't personally think we need to look at a blanket waiver of all work requirements, but I think that we need to have a very sympathetic and compassionate approach. That if somebody has been impacted by COVID, I mean, we're not right. We don't want to evict anybody or fine anybody as a result of that. So then the next one that I had on here is, so the city has got some tools from a compliance standpoint that they've been using. One of those being just kind of, I guess, some software tools that allow the city to kind of look for people that are renting short term and to locate those individuals. And there's some other tools out there that would help with identifying people who own real estate in the OEZ, but that have taken steps to hide it through trusts or LLCs, et cetera. And so really just, my opinion would be that that's something that we should use if there's people that are basically breaking the rules and actively trying to deceive APCHA. We should use every tool we've got to try and catch those people. And so, that's something I think that the board needs to discuss. Any disagreement there or thoughts?
Let's jump in on the COVID one first, if that's okay, and then do the OEZ/STR tools one second, just to break that up. Is that okay?
Sure.
Great. So on the COVID piece, I guess my first questions would be, is this an ongoing thing that we're already experiencing from a staff perspective? People no longer able to meet their work requirements because of COVID? If so, what does that actually look like? And if we're not yet experiencing it, do we think that we will in the near or medium term?
From a 2020 perspective, if folks contacted us, we waived the 2020 work requirement as long as we received documentation that they lost their job due to COVID, and so we got that from the employer, and then we received their last pay stub. However, are we seeing that in 2021? Not necessarily yet. I have a feeling we likely will. I did talk to a few people who have said, well, I don't have to go back to work, so I'm not going to, but doesn't that mean I can still stay because of COVID? And so it's just the conversation, I think, I agree with Carson. I don't think it should be a blanket waiver at this point. And unless there's a massive shutdown, I can't see that reoccurring. But I do expect it. I also expect seeing a fair number of biennial affidavits, which hypothetically are set to go out in April. And it will be interesting to see what's returned on those and how many folks did not actually work 1,500 hours that might mention it on that affidavit from 2020 at this point. So.
Stephanie, you mentioned people like choosing not to go to work and then talking about COVID. How do we tease out hardship? People can't work, would want to. We don't want them to lose their house as a result, versus people voluntarily not working who don't need to, which is kind of not the demographic we're trying to house. How do we do that?
So a lot of it's looking at what the employment situation is and then getting documentation from the employer. For example, there are jobs. I don't know if Aspen Pitkin Company is still looking for lift attendants, but I know at some points they were. And so, some of the conversations I've had, well, other people might need to work more than I do, so I'm going to sit this out. And it's, well, I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, you do have to work. It's employee housing at this point, and so I am expecting those conversations to be few and far between. I know we have had people kind of curious as certain industries are slow to return, such as kind of there seems to be a lot of massage therapists that live in our housing. I've certainly talked to a handful as their business starts to pick back up, or folks that are babysitters for or nannies basically for their work. And so I think it is on a case-by-case basis that we have the discussion and really figure out what their specific circumstances are as we move forward. Because at least as of right now, I mean, we're open for business for the most part. I mean, certainly at reduced rates, but for the most part, we're open. Did that answer your question?
Answered mine, yeah. And Carson, sorry, I can't, but if you lead us through this or call on Francie.
Sure.
Sitting back.
Go ahead, Francie.
I have an employee at Fat Belly who just said, well, I'm not going to work because I can get increased disability or unemployment right now. And so unemployment called us, and we said, no, we didn't fire her. That's not what happened. And so I think there are some avenues for checking to see if somebody really, in fact, was laid off or whether it's a choice. And I think you might find a few of those. I mean, maybe people who live in APCHA are not like this employee that I had, but it definitely came up for us. And I mean, it was unfortunate, but so I think maybe if they're not on unemployment, that would be a red flag that, oh, well, maybe they didn't get laid off.
Great point. So, I mean, I think that's something that, Skippy, I think you're on mute, or you?
Sorry, I was just saying, I realize you can't see David's digital hand, but it's up.
Wow. David.
I agree that we certainly need to discuss and come to some sort of solutions on these kinds of situations. But on the other hand, I think that the weirdness of COVID and everything that it's done to the whole world, I don't think it's going to be a one and done. APCHA's been operating, 30 years now, 40 years? I think we just need to be really careful about what we codify as, making you ineligible to continue to live in our units. There needs to be some flexibility, and maybe we don't write in so much right now to stay flexible for as the world continues to turn.
Great point. Skippy?
Yes, I guess just to kind of come back to some potential action on this, I think you're absolutely right to bring it up, and I think I'm in complete agreement on the goals. My question is just for staff, do we need an extra tool right now, or is what we're doing working to meet those who have genuine COVID-related hardships with compassion to stay in their units, and to not extend that to those who are choosing to use it preferentially to their advantage unfairly?
I think as of right now, if things continue as they are and most people are working, then we should be okay handling the one-off conversations. And certainly if we're seeing a lot of the same, we can bring it back as a board discussion. I think, Francie, I had a similar conversation with someone that it sounds like one of your employees had. So I think those are few and far between. We're not allowing folks to move into rental housing that don't have employment right now. That has been consistent. There was a point last year when Pitkin County was closed down that if someone had a job that was supposed to start in June or July, we did allow them possibly to move in a bit early, and then followed up with them after the fact. But right now we're requiring employment before move-in. So it's a to be determined, to be honest, Skippy. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Carson, where does that leave you on that one?
So, I mean, it sounds to me like on that one that we'll just sort of stick with the status quo, and if there's issues, then staff can bring those back to the board, and we can discuss specifics at that time.
Works for me.
Francie, David, that sound good with you? Okay, perfect. Okay, so the next one that I mentioned, some of the online tools that the city of Aspen is using, for example, to find short-term rentals. And then, as I mentioned, there's some additional tools just to sort of help locate people that have perhaps, I guess, taken steps to hide the fact that they own property in the ownership exclusion zone. As I said, I think that, the city of Aspen is using those. I think we've actually already run a search on the online rentals and not found anything. And so, I just sort of the opinion, I don't know if we needed anything formal here, but I think it's maybe more just a direction for staff. But, I would be of the opinion that is something that we should continue. Anybody with thoughts on that? Skippy shaking his head yes. Francie?
I just have a question about that. So are you saying, Carson, that there could possibly be people who own properties that they are renting out for short-term rentals, and they're also living in an APCHA unit?
No, the ones that it's more trying to find people who are renting their APCHA unit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I see what you mean. Yeah, I got you.
Right. So, David? Thoughts on that? You're on mute.
Yeah, so the general impression is that we continue on and take it on a case-by-case basis if it gets too weird.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. Okay. So from a compliance standpoint, next one that I had was, is there a prioritization that staff should be pursuing compliance cases? I think staff has a number of cases and obviously some limited time. And so, are there some cases that are more egregious than others? For example, owning property in the OEZ, short-term rentals, not living in your unit for 9 months a year, work requirements, et cetera. Are there any cases that the board would like staff to prioritize?
Person, can I ask one question on the last issue before we move on to this one?
Sure.
So I was shaking my head vigorously for the use of the city's STR tools, continuation of doing that. You also mentioned tools for identifying OEZ ownership. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I assume we're not using those currently. I don't want to, spend a huge amount of time or money on a problem that isn't there, but I know at least in my limited time on the board, we've seen, I think, at least 2 cases where someone did own in the OEZ, and that is a big no-no. So can you talk a bit more about what tools might be available to us?
Yeah, there's some tools out there that, that are basically free or very, very, very low cost. That would just help you determine people who own property, who live in APCHA housing and own property in the ownership exclusion zone. It's pretty straightforward, and I can tell you I've already run some of that, and there's a lot. There's quite a few out there. So
I would be assuming that what you're saying is correct and accurate. I'm sure it is. I would be very interested in us using such a tool to identify individuals.
Right.
Staff, do you guys have a perspective on this?
I think if the board gives us direction, we're happy to use those tools. I think Carson's probably right that folks might own other property in the ownership exclusion zone and maybe that property placed in trust, so it's not as easy for APCHA staff to find. Normally, we hear about these and we wait for a neighbor or someone in the community to submit a complaint that says, hey, I think my neighbor owns other land, or not land, excuse me, another home somewhere else in the valley, and they rent it out. But I do think there's cases of our owners owning other property in the ownership exclusion zone.
Francie?
How far afield does the OEZ go?
So the ownership exclusion zone, as it's currently run, it extends basically the Roaring Fork watershed. So down to Glenwood, and then to Rifle, and then to No Name, and then up to Marble, and to Route I. So kind of that general, basically, valley area. And the property has to be usable. It has to be developed, and it has to be a four-season, basically, development. So sometimes if it's a remote cabin in Marble, for example, it's okay if you can't get to it except for a couple months of the year.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I guess my thought, Carson, just hearing that, yeah, I think this is a big shift in how APCHA goes about enforcement and compliance, but an important one. But I really want to hear the whole board have an opportunity to weigh in. So perhaps just asking staff to look at the practicalities of this, like what does a system out there look like? What does it cost? How much time would it take to actually interact with this thing? And then bringing that back to the board at a later time.
Yep.
And just to add in, if I may, Carson, I think as staff has talked about this and talked about it with Carson, I think this falls into what, from what I've heard from staff, and I completely agree, is probably one of the most egregious violations of APCHA, right? You have a habitable home that either you're not using or you're renting out, and because there is an option to live closer to town and not to deal with traffic or what have you, that you're making that choice. And as Rachel, we always hear Rachel say, it is taking it away from someone else in the workforce who needs that. So it's really a big hit. I think Bethany and Carson have talked through some ways of initially, right, these are compliance cases, you know, we meet every 2 weeks, including today, Bethany, Cindy, Tom, and myself, and talk through compliance cases. They're high maintenance, but some of the initial steps in these of sending out notices to people, looking for documentation so they can, if we're coming up with a match, that they can somehow prove this is not my house or I sold that or something like that. It may not be a huge administrative burden. And I think what I heard tonight, which is really important, is that for the rest of you, that's a really high priority for compliance as well. And I hear you, Skippy, like bring it back to the board at the next meeting just to confirm that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, Diane. I mean, if it's the next board meeting, great. If it takes more time, I think that's okay too. And it would also be nice to know the practicalities of, you know, if this thing turns up 50 homes, I mean, that feels like a huge burden to oversee. So, you know, what is the staging of the implementation, or do we need extra people to oversee that? Do we give the community a 6 months heads up, this is happening, so feel free to solve this on your own? I mean, I don't know the answer, but just some thought to that stuff as well would be.
Sure, and that's the piece that I think both Bethany and Carson have given some thought to, and that we could actually start it pretty easily. If we turn up with 50 and we've got 40 legitimate cases, at that point, I would definitely be going to the city and county for a supplemental request to hire help or go out and hire temps, because that's where, right, I've heard Carson say it before, for every compliance case, it is $1 million plus in dollars we don't have to invest in a new unit.
That's exactly right. If you come back and say there's units that could be freed up, I'm going to say, you told those it would cost $25 million and you're asking for $100,000? Okay.
Yes, the return on investment is fabulous.
Nice.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carson.
Okay. So then the next question, and I think that this is one that, I mean, just as far as the prioritization that staff should pursue. I mean, I think this one kind of goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about. You know, I mean, so I think just as far as how we want staff to spend their time, or are there certain cases that if they have, you know, if staff ends up with a situation where they have more than they can handle, sort of giving them direction of which ones they should begin to tackle first, which are the highest priority, which are the most egregious, right? I mean, obviously all violations of the regulations are violations of the regulations. However, with limited time, right, staff may have to prioritize some of those. And is that something that the board wants to provide staff with direction on sort of how to eat an elephant, if you will?
And just echo that, I think that's incredibly important during a biennial affidavit year. When the last one came in 2019, staff spent a significant amount of time confirming on the property and confirming the data that was submitted back to us to ensure its accuracy. And then following up with some owners who had tenants in the unit that weren't APCHA qualified at the time. And so I do think that it's a crucial discussion right now.
So, I mean, in my mind, that's something, I mean, if anybody has comments on that, jump in. But in my mind, I mean, that is a discussion, I think, for the greater board, for the whole board, not just for half of it. Skippy.
Can you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've talked about the cardinal sins before, and my guess is you would think that those would jump to the top of that list. Do they, and what are they, just for conversation?
Well, I mean, in my mind, I mean, the most egregious, I think if you're deceptively, so fraud, owning property in the valley, in the OEZ, to me is perhaps one of the most egregious. And then, you know, obviously, not living here, not working here, renting your property out. In my mind, those are kind of the four that, in my mind, those would be the four most important, not necessarily in that order. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, someone like knocked on my door very aggressively. Not sure I caught you, but I heard OEZ violation, renting out STR, not living here and not working. Were those the four?
Correct.
I guess the question I would have is for everyone else, like, do those feel a level above the rest? Are there others that should be at that level? What's kind of everyone's feeling about these?
Francie, go ahead.
Well, I think that threatening behavior to neighbors and APCHA people would be pretty serious. I mean, if that can stand by itself as a compliance, you know, or if that has to be in coordination with some other one, but is that?
Well, I mean, in my mind, I think that's pretty infrequent, and in my mind, if that happens, that escalates to number one immediately. I mean,
okay.
That's right. That's just not even in my mind. You know, that's just immediately something that gets dealt with.
Okay.
Right, and it's not to say that we're not going to enforce the others. I think it's more just direction for staff of if they find themselves with more cases than time, just which should they prioritize.
Yes, I guess I'm in agreement that these are sort of the top four. I guess if I was prioritizing in terms of staff time. I would probably go in the order of STR, OEZ, not living here, and then not working. And just the reason is those first two, as I think we understand, are pretty easy to identify. They don't take a ton of time to free things up quicker. Not living here takes a little bit more time, but less. And not working, as we've seen, can be quite difficult. So I would make that number 4 on the top tier.
Right. I would agree with that. I do think that that is something that we want to get feedback from the entire board. So I don't know if that looks like a survey or if that is just a discussion. But and maybe the easy way to do this is to sort of put some of this together and just send out a survey to the board and then come back and discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, I think just making it simple, just why is this request even being talked about, right? As Bethany just said, there may be another big group of work that needs to be done, and so just having priority is important. And then just saying, this is the proposed priority list. Top tier is these 4 in this order, and then tier 2 is, whatever else, and then tier 3, I bet there's some minor stuff that staff could suggest would be at the low end, and then just asking people to sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, or make edits, as opposed to asking everyone to write their own list. Might be the easier way to do it.
Okay. Francie, David, any other thoughts?
That sounds good. Would you mind refreshing my mind on how many renters and how many owners there are in APCHA? So I have sort of a sense of how many people we're looking over.
We don't know, right? I mean, we have an idea, but as we go through Home Track, I mean, we have a general idea, but as we go through Home Track, we're going to get a much more, a much closer or much more accurate idea. But Bethany, I mean, what's our estimate?
So we have roughly 1,300 ownership units. And
1,300 owners?
Yeah, ownership units. So there could actually be, 2 owners per unit in some cases. So, but there's 1,300 ownership units, and there's about that number of rental units as well. I don't have that exact number. Cindy probably does off the tip of her tongue.
And I'm assuming that, we have closer relationship with the renters because they have to pay rent every month as compared to the owners who are probably more independent. So are these compliance checks done on a regular basis, or is it only when you get a call from a neighbor or a mortgage payment or a rental check doesn't come in or something?
So from an ownership standpoint, there's a biennial affidavit for 2 years, and that requires the owners to answer a few questions. Are you working? Are you still living in the unit? And do you not own any other property in the ownership exclusion zone? Besides that, from an ownership perspective, most of the time it's complaints from either members in the community, sometimes HOAs, or the city recently with their new short-term rental software, and I know the counties is coming online, I think at some point soon. I don't know the date on that. From a rental standpoint, some of the units are APCHA managed, so we manage just around 300 units, and so I would like to say that we see those tenants on a monthly basis due to rent, and then the rest of the units are either Centennial or Castle Ridge, so those tenants might have to be qualified from APCHA in the beginning, and then they're requalified every 2 years. But in between, we don't really hear from them. Occasionally, we get questions from their tenant neighbors or property managers asking us to check up on something if they don't think someone's in the unit. But the majority of compliance cases, and I mean 95+%, is usually tied to our ownership set. Just because of those more frequent check-ins with renters.
Okay, that was really clear. Thank you.
So is this priority suggestion and then question for the full board, something that would come back at the next meeting and just be in the packet for people to review, or how do we think this would be best done?
The boss, man.
Are you asking staff or are you asking the board?
I'm asking either, whoever.
Staff's happy to take the general direction and bring it back, either a short informational memo in the next packet that just says the board members in attendance at March 3rd felt that, you know, this was roughly the order of priority, and see if there's concurrence or if there's diverging opinions, and we can talk about it at that point.
Carson, does that sound to you?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. And
sorry, I was just going to add that I think one of the goals would be, you know, it's inevitable that on any board, whether it be a BOCC, city council, et cetera, that there are going to be people who don't make the meeting. And I think that the progress you've made tonight, we want to build on that rather than kind of start from scratch if at all possible. And it's absolutely appropriate for other people to ask questions, but I think what Bethany's talking about and Carson is talking about, coming back with that prioritized list and trying to confirm it rather than kind of relitigate it, if you will.
Right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if the timing is right to also have information about the OEZ identification tool as it relates to that, it could be in the same memo.
Perfect. Okay, and then so that sounds good. So then the next one that I had was actually something Kelly brought up earlier, and just sort of, I guess from the board standpoint, how do we feel the current public perception around enforcement and compliance is going? And, you know, specifically as it relates to, you know, there have been a number of people that have said, well, you know, now that the fine system is in place, nobody ever gets evicted again. And, you know, I mean, that is, to my knowledge, that was never a part of the conversation. And, you know, I mean, I remember when we voted on that before the vote, I mean, I explicitly said, right, we're not saying that by instituting a fine system, nobody ever gets evicted. And so, you know, it's I guess from a board standpoint, is there, you know, are we basically letting somebody else tell our story? Is this something that we should put together some sort of a formal communication, or, you know, is it something we need to talk to the papers and try and get, you know, some stories out there? You know, it's just really kind of making it clear that that there has not been a fundamental shift in the way that the enforcement cases are going, basically. And so, you know, I think the question for the board is are we comfortable with the sort of the status quo? Do we need to look at some additional communications, just to be, you know, to be transparent with the public, so that everybody knows, you know, the way that APCHA is going to approach compliance. Francie?
You're meaning people other than the APCHA participants. You're talking about the general public?
No.
Assuming you're communicating this with the APCHA participants.
I mean, it's in the regulations, but I think there's a lot of public perception among the general public and among APCHA residents that, you know, I think I've seen it. It's been in the newspaper. I've heard it numerous times in public comments, letters to the editor. There have been numerous people that have said, "Look, you know, no more evictions." And it's like, I have not been a part of any conversation that has said that. So, you know, I'm not exactly sure where it's coming from, but it's, in my mind, it's pretty clear that there is there's at least the perception that there's been a change that, in my mind, there is not. And so do we need to clarify that with the public? Skippy?
I appreciate bringing it up, man. From the micro, I think it's really feasible or worth our time in terms of return of the narrative to try to correct every individual in the letters to the editor column that has a false idea of what's going on. I really don't. We're just never going to be able to put that cat in the bag. And I just don't think it's a useful use of our time from a communication standpoint to be doing that. It almost just validates all of those things. What I do think be beneficial, because I think your summary of the problem statement is correct. Like, I don't think we've done a good job from a communication standpoint if the goal is to have a broad and generalized understanding within the community of the reality of what APCHA does and how it does it. I don't think we're nailing that. And that's not the fault of anyone. This is like what happens in a 50-year-old organization that's making a lot of changes. And a community that likes to talk and make up stories. It's just the thing. But I do think that there's an opportunity in the nexus between the launch of Home Check, which is there's a new sheriff in town. We actually know what the hell's going on, and we're going to use this information to instill the fairness within the system that we've always strove for, serve the community, and this new or relatively new board structure that has adopted and codified a 5-year strategic and work plan that is grounded in new principles of equity and compassion to tell our story of how we are reorienting or doubling down on both existing in a enforced, fair, compliant universe that strives to remove bad actors or freeloaders, but also addresses each individual as they are as a compassionate member of the community. And I think that there is an opportunity to work with the communication team at the city and, take a month with a coordinated effort to reach out to the papers, hi Carolyn, and, the magazines or local bloggers, and just sit down and tell that story. And I do think that's what would need to happen. I don't think a press release is going to get it done. There's 100 of them a day. But I do think there's an opportunity for us to re-engage with the public in that way.
Great. I mean, I think that sounds good. I mean, you talk about Carolyn. I mean, Carolyn comes to every one of our meetings, and right there was an article in the paper that said, something along those lines, right? So, I just think that that we just need to be more clear and transparent, and I think that just putting those communications out, like you said, I think that would solve I think that would solve a lot of our issues.
Or at least try.
Or try, right? I mean, right.
My question for staff would be just from a lot on our plate. Is there anything in the budget or staffing from the rollout of Home Track around public communication that could be utilized to kind of re-engage the community in the story of this reorientation without another giant complicated project on staff?
My internet just cut, so Diane or Cindy, I did not hear Skippy's question at all, so I cannot provide an answer.
I think, are you talking about, like, specifically about enforcement?
Well, just if we were to follow, I think, the suggestion that I hear, which is just to spend some period of time re-engaging with the press and the community through a variety of outlets, talking about, APCHA's approach to enforcement and fairness within the system. I would be at minimum concerned about asking staff to take on such a big communications project. So I just wondered if, because I think part of this is the rollout of HomeTrack itself and the new tools that we have to actually do this, is there anything within that existing budget or plan or HomeTrack staff that remains that could help facilitate that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that Cindy, Bethany, Andrew, and I meet biweekly with Slate Communications. So we actually have an agency that we work with, and things like the buyer's guide, Bethany worked with them on the layout, language, and those types of things. On HomeTrack, we actually did have some initial communications that they put together, and even in our meeting yesterday with Slate, we actually have pulled back a little bit on our HomeTrack promotion, because what we found is that people go in and use HomeTrack when it's the right time for them. So we're not going to get additional usage because we put an ad out. Now, where we are spending a lot of time talking with them right now is Bethany's leading the biennial process, but we're all involved in that, the biennial affidavit process. And what we're talking about there is we expect we'll be able to get an X percentage. First and foremost, the last time they did this, they got a 90%, Bethany, is that the right number?
It was closer to 95, actually. It took 6 months, and actually they're still coming in. They were coming in last November still, so.
Yeah, right. That's a stunning number, but it was a lot of work, right? So in your first round of outreach, you get this much, et cetera, and the focus on that has really been making it as easy as possible for the end user. So we're going to be using SurveyMonkey, et cetera, et cetera. What we are planning are additional marketing, specifically marketing activities to go the rest of the way. Now, when you talk about kind of general impressions of APCHA, I think that is an opportunity, and I was going through the work plan the other night, and it's something David and I talked about when I had my first conversation with him. David's got a really strong marketing background. I know this group has talked about doing it before, but it may be time to bring that subcommittee back together to say, not what is the 30-page marketing plan, but what are the 3 or 4 things that APCHA should be doing that we may not be doing now, and how do we want to execute those things? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, just I think the challenge that I have personally is I get to see everything that goes on with APCHA. So I see how fair and how transparent and how equitable APCHA is with everyone within the system. And I don't feel like we do a good enough job of telling that story. And I feel like a lot of people misrepresent for their own benefit. They go out into public and they tell anybody who will listen, look at the horrible thing that APCHA did, and it's just simply not true. And if we're not out there sort of, and I'm not saying every single letter to the editor, right? I mean, I'm talking about sort of larger scale, and that's it's the reason the previous board had directed the previous executive director to issue press releases, right? So maybe press releases they're not the right approach. I'm just saying, I wish that the public could see everything that I see, and I think if they did, the public perception would be much different than how some people perceive APCHA. So.
David has had his hand up as well. Carson, you can't see it.
I kind of feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. I've been saying this, I think, since I got on the board, but everything that Carson has said, I agree with completely, and have kind of been pushing that for a while. We don't need to focus on the bad things that are happening to bad people within the system, but we do need to have a coherent voice in the community to talk about all the great things that are going on. And when we have established that, if someone is trying to muddy our reputation, we will have a higher ground to respond with the truth to whatever those situations might be. But so far, this organization has never had any sort of an outreach to the community regarding what we do. And that's crazy. It just seems crazy to me. This is an incredible organization. Some of these meetings are some of the most fun I have over the course of a week or a month, but because really smart people are talking about trying to do really good things. We need to let the working organization, really good people, and when the bad eggs come along, not doing anything out of anger or vengeance, we're continuing to keep on being a reputable, strong organization.
Diane, what when you mentioned the subcommittee, which one are you referencing? I'm just thinking about moving us along and keeping us on schedule, and perhaps part of that info memo could be a recommendation that group take it back up, but I wasn't sure which group you were referencing.
Sorry, and just so you know, Francie's had her hand up too. I believe there was a marketing subcommittee that had planned on putting together a 1 or 2 page marketing plan.
Is it the same as the public outreach subcommittee or different?
That's the same thing.
The same thing. So Kelly, myself, and David. Okay. If it makes sense to everyone else, I would just recommend that on this, whether it's in the next packet or an info update, however we talk about all these compliance things, the prioritization OEZ, if that could be a recommendation for the board to look at and thumbs up or thumbs down, I think that would make sense for me as a way to move this forward.
Francie's got her hand up.
I just wanted to make a suggestion that I think the guest column is a really influential part of the newspaper, and people read it. And so maybe between that committee and other staff, I mean, you have a pretty compelling way of speaking about APCHA, Skippy. So do you, David. So maybe, just saying this is what APCHA looks like now, and saying some of those really fine points that all three of you have been making to the public, and not coming at it from a reactionary to negativity sort of perspective, but just like meet the new APCHA sort of thing. And I mean, I have found that the responses to the guest columns are tend to be pretty robust.
And Skippy, just I think I heard you. I'm not sure I'm clear here, so maybe I'll just suggest that it might be that the best next step on the marketing side would be, there's not a person at APCHA who kind of owns marketing. There's really, and there's not a ton of bandwidth for it. And what's great about Slate is they're super affordable. They're good at what they do, and it's really limited use of them. So maybe even if just that, I forget, a communication subcommittee got together and just like you guys have one meeting and just talk about what could you do as a next step? Like, what would that look like? Or come up with 5 things that could be done, and then bringing that as the conversation. Because I think for me, the compliance, the technical compliance element and the marketing piece don't necessarily go together.
Understood. That works for me if it works for others. And the question I would have, just to get that ball rolling, because David, I know this is something you're really passionate about, and as Francie said, speak about it quite eloquently. Would you be able to draft a sort of just initial, like Francie said, guest column, so 750 words or less of like meet the new APCHA, and bring it to that meeting as the basis for discussion?
Certainly, I'd be willing to give it a shot, with the understanding that there would be a lot of input from others to really get across where we want to go. But yeah, I'm willing to do the start.
I guess the only thing I would say is I don't know if meet the new APCHA is the right term. I mean, I don't feel like anything has changed, right? I mean, I think it's just a change in our communication. I mean, I've been involved with the board now for, I guess, like 3 years, and I mean, just time and time again, I just see APCHA, granting more time and staff really trying to dig in and, just being very fair, like almost to a fault sometimes. I mean, just being extremely fair with people, and I think it's just sort of just being more transparent is sort of my thought, and not necessarily that there's been a change.
I think, though, there is an impression, Carson, that, well, let me just say, when I had spent a couple hours with Dorothea Ferris the other day, and she said, well, what's happening at APCHA now? How is APCHA doing? Have things changed since all the changeover? And so I do think there is this sort of looking forward among people who talk about APCHA that there was some leftover, bad feelings or something. And people want to know, well, where are we now? Has it moved forward? And that would just be a one-time first step possibility. And anyway, just an idea.
Yeah, Carson, just to add to that, because I understand what you're saying and I hear that, but also the whole point is like everyone else doesn't know what you know, right?
Right, exactly, right.
You're not in the room, you are, and I really think that Francie's framing of meet the new APCHA, right? It doesn't have to be those words, but it lends itself to a new beginning in a way that's free from defensiveness. It's not defending the record or going and saying, hey, we've actually been so-and-so. It's just a statement of here's what's going to happen going forwards. And I feel like often that like door openers met with a door opener. So those who have that closed mindset about what APCHA has been are probably going to be more willing to accept something going forward. So more stylistic than anything, but I think probably effective.
Fair enough.
If you just add an idea to what you're talking about, I think the discussion that you just had is really emblematic of why I think it might be helpful if you could pull that group together just even once before bringing it to the board, because then you get to sort of vet some of the ideas. And like everything that we bring to the board, Cindy and Bethany and I, we always talk about it. And a lot of times, multiple times, we all review it. And that way, it doesn't put all the pressure on David to, be like, okay, here it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I'll get an email out to that group following this meeting, and we'll get together in the digital when we can. Cool. Carson, do you have anything else on compliance stuff? I'm just looking at time.
No, I mean, no. I mean, the only other thing I had is just at some point, do we look at the fine schedule and just sort of review how things are going, and if that all makes sense. But that's really it. That's all I had. Anything else for Carson on this stuff? And Carson, thank you for bringing this forward. I hope this feels like good motion forward to you. It does to me. Agreed. Okay. Well, then, not seeing anything else there, I'll close out the compliance discussion. We'll come back at the next meeting or when staff is ready. The last thing on our agenda is member comments. These are just sort of optional at the end of the meeting. They can be about anything that we talked about or what you feel about the weather today. Is there anyone who's interested in saying anything for the record? I don't see anything here.
Although the weather was pretty amazing today.
Yeah, it's spring. I ran in shorts. It was awesome.
And I have daffodils coming up in my garden.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. That's great. Yeah, I'll just say one thing briefly. With the municipal election being over, I mean, obviously, congratulations to the winners and congratulations to the candidates. It's no small thing to run for public office. But, you know, I will say that what I heard often in the campaign, anecdotally and in the papers, is this narrative around, I think it was on the front page of the paper today, like old guard versus new guard. And I just want to say that I really think that's a false narrative. When I talk to members of the old guard, or I talk to members of this new guard, whatever that means, you know, our vision for the ideal Aspen, what we can be, is it's the same, right? It's rooted in those core principles and values from the 60s and 70s around the Aspen idea and about being a point of gathering of the world, but a full lived-in community here. That balance of, you know, all the things that make Aspen special. And, you know, I just think APCHA and housing is maybe the best example of how we can not view old versus new as a competition or somehow a threat to one another, but like old and new working towards a common purpose. For the old guard, so to speak, we don't even have this program, and 50 years later, someone like me gets to show up and have an opportunity to live in the best place in the world, working a normal job. That's incredible. And there's a lot of stuff about the system that's not working great because it's 50 years old and unexpected things happen. And we need to have, frankly, the humility to say, hey, we've done has worked really well. Let's keep doing it. Other hasn't. And who else has some new ideas on how to fix it? Be willing to work together and accept those new ideas to help fix the system and make it better for everyone. So, I just think we're doing the work that demonstrates that it's not a verse, it's an and. And I just wanted to, you know, offer that up to the community or anyone watching. That's it. And with that, we can finish early. I guess I'd entertain a motion to close the meeting, and Rick's not here, so someone else will have an opportunity to get that in.
Move to end the meeting.
I'll second.
Staff, would you read the roll?
Skippy.
Yeah.
David.
Yes.
Francie.
Yes.
Carson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful evening, guys. See you in like full spring in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Or a snowstorm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.